Today I have the pleasure of talking to Mr. Balázs Hidvéghi, who is a former member of the Hungarian Parliament, has also been the Director of Communications and spokesperson of the governing party Fidesz, and since 2019 is a member of the European Parliament, where he is a member of the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. Good afternoon, Mr. Hidvéghi.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for your time. And the reason why we decided to have this interview is that in the Estonian media, which is overwhelmingly liberal, of course, there has been a series of very critical articles really attacking the Hungarian government, declaring that that Hungary has left the free world, that it has turned towards dictatorship, abandoned the ideal of democracy and the rule of law, abandoned the ideal of freedom of media, and so on. You've probably heard all of those accusations. But the problem is that there is no sort of counterforce, or there is no possibility to hear the other part of the dispute. So that was the reason why I decided to talk to you, in order to give another perspective of the situation in Hungary. Mm-hmm. So let me perhaps start with a general question about the reasons why liberal media has been attacking Hungary so heavily throughout the last months, during which we've faced the crisis caused by the spread of the virus.
Well, thank you for this opportunity, first of all, to speak to you and speak to your readers, to your viewers. It is very important indeed to tell a story, and to tell all sides of a story, and to look at it when you think about developments and want to formulate an opinion. In fact, when you said that there is no other side of the story to it, only one reading, only one interpretation, it tells a lot about the bias and imbalance of media in the European Union. Many countries, in the majority of places, you really only read about one set of values and one set of ideas when they interpret things, and that's bad for democracy. It's bad for free thought and freedom in general. So I'm thankful and grateful to you that you are now giving this opportunity to tell the other side of the story indeed. You asked me why I think that the liberal media has been attacking the government over the past months. Well, I think the most important reason is that the current government in Hungary, the Fidesz Christian Democratic Coalition government, has been a very forceful and a very successful conservative government. We have been successful, I think, in leading the country, and also in building up support, popular support, behind the ideas of conservatism, the ideas of Christian values and traditions, of European traditional way of life, etc. This line of attack has not, by the liberals, is not been a new thing. It didn't begin just now over the coronavirus. It began years ago, and I think the main reason for it is that they dislike, the liberals, they dislike other opinions than theirs. In that sense, in fact, by today, the liberal mainstream, the liberal elite, has become a traitor to the idea of freedom and of liberty. Liberalism has a beautiful tradition of freedom, of standing up for liberty, as its name suggests. And we value those traditions, conservatives also. But I think by today, by the second part already of the 20th century and today, the 21st century, liberals are no longer the defenders of freedom. In fact, they have become the enemies of freedom, and they have become primarily totally intolerant of other views, of other values than their own. And that is, I think, what explains why they are attacking a right-wing government that has been successful and is not afraid to tell its own values, to talk about its own values, and to implement a sort of conservative political agenda. This is what we have been doing, and this is why we are continually being attacked by those who dislike this success.
Yes, I completely agree with you. We see the same situation in Estonia, that those who call themselves liberals happen to be the most intolerant people in our society, and it's also visible in media circles, of course. But one question which has arisen in my mind is also that I don't understand why the media behaves so unprofessionally. Because, you know, it's one of the basic rules of producing good media coverage that you actually give the other side also the possibility to talk. I even wrote a letter to the editor-in-chief of the biggest newspaper in Estonia asking that, you know, why do you do that? Because it's actually harmful to the image of your newspaper. Because, you know, it's simply not professional. It's not a matter of having different opinions. It's a matter of doing media professionally. So that's...
And there's another side, another element here that I want to add, because I totally agree. This is one important aspect. But I give you an example. The Hungarian Minister for Foreign Affairs, Péter Szijjártó, was interviewed during the coronavirus, already the quarantine situation, maybe it was a month ago or 6 weeks ago, something like that. He was interviewed on CNN International. And he was interviewed by a well-known news anchor of CNN. And asking, but basically making a statement saying, well, why is it that the Hungarian Parliament, she asked, has been suspended? And then the minister replied, well, excuse me, I'm a great admirer of your programs, but right there, this is a classic piece of fake news. He said, I come from the Parliament where I just spoke. It's not suspended, it's in session. And in fact, it did have, during the crisis situation, still has more powers in comparison to other parliaments, for instance, about how long the special order, the state of danger, should be maintained. They attacked the Hungarian government, and of course Viktor Orban, the prime minister, who is always in the center of the attacks. They attacked him and the government of getting a mandate with no parliamentary control and no end date. Whereas, on the contrary, the parliament has the power, and it has had it all through this time, to put an end to the state of danger, and it will do so. In fact, it has already been put into Parliament, so it's on the papers of Parliament, and a decision is due about that soon. So everything has been done constitutionally, according to the Constitution, Hungarian Constitution, which describes very well what it is, a special state of danger, how it can be applied, until when, and who has what kind of powers during this situation. So it's just an example of that, and that's also, journalism. It's a leading journalist in a leading international TV series asking a question and making a statement that is just 100% untrue.
Yeah, the example you brought reminded me of another occasion where your foreign minister was interviewed in the Estonian National Broadcasting Union, actually the national TV. He was in Estonia at the beginning of the year, and the host of the show asked Mr. Szijjártó whether she understands correctly that the example of the Hungarian government, which the Hungarian government wants to follow, is Russia, China and Turkey. And Mr. Szijjártó replied, of course, very well, saying that, this is complete nonsense. That, well, these were not his words, but he basically expressed the idea that where do you get such an idea? That these are our examples.
Unfortunately, I have to also say that the Hungarian opposition, which is in not in a particularly good shape, and I think it is not in a good shape primarily because of a lack of ideas, a lack of clear, policy ideas, a clear vision about Hungary. All they can say is that they hate Orban and they want themselves in power and not him. But that's where really it ends. They don't really have a political program that would be more delicate or more sophisticated than that. And they also, unfortunately, engage in continuous attacks against Hungary and the Hungarian government outside of the country. They do that in the European Parliament, they do that in other places, and that's very unfortunate. And I don't think it will win them a majority or bring them a majority at elections. It may be good for somebody, who really dislikes Orban for some reason, and there are people like that, and it's okay, that's democracy. But to garner support for a majority at elections, it seems to be too little by the opposition.
Well, I can definitely say that the way things taking place in Hungary are portrayed in the Estonian media, it is very clear that there is an international campaign behind all of this.
Yes,
there is a series of articles, and you can see that they follow one and the same pattern. And what is also very peculiar is that oftentimes articles which are completely one-sided and completely aggressive are published anonymously. There is no journalist has actually signed them. A good example was an article published on the 22nd of April, again in the biggest newspaper in Estonia, Postimees, and it was a statement made by Civico Europe. You are probably aware of it. That's a so-called citizens organization which had written a text, and it was signed by many so-called opinion leaders, including the former Prime Minister of Estonia. And it was an incredible text with very, very serious accusations that abandoning rule of law, dictatorship, trampling upon the ideal of democracy and so on. But no signature, no one in this newspaper actually signed this article, indicating that he is behind the decision to publish this article. So there is definitely a campaign behind it.
Is there something similar in the Estonian public life or political life? One-sidedness?
Yes, of course. In the liberal media, all the time, the most conservative party is attacked the most. It's absolutely obvious. But the question is that why single out one country? You don't see in the Estonian media attacks against, let's say, the French government or the Italian government or the Spanish government or the English government or the Dutch government. It's all the time against the Hungarian government. So it's just incredible because it's just not logical.
Exactly, I agree with that. There is a tendency, it seems to me, that when there is a right-wing government somewhere, and if it's a characteristic government, if it is strong, if it does things and manages to accomplish things, especially then immediately, this left-wing international elite journalists, NGOs, pressure groups, etc., media. Immediately they find that there is a rule of law problem, immediately, but only with these governments. I call to your attention that, for example, when Matteo Salvini was Minister of the Interior in Italy, and he managed to put forward a very characteristic policy about guarding defending the frontiers, the borders, about standing up against illegal crossing into Italy and into the European Union. Then he was attacked. He was called a fascist and everything else. Or I tell you, Boris Johnson, for example, he has been leading the United Kingdom with a strong mandate now, and he's attacked all the time, and he's called a populist, etc., because he doesn't fit in this liberal idea and liberal mainstream, which is, again, intolerant of views other than their own. Yeah. And that's the problem. And then when there are things like you mentioned France, for example, if there is clear violation of human rights in the streets of Paris, for example, similar things happen that they are talking about concerning Hungary or other places, then everybody is silent and nobody is having a problem with it. So it just illustrates the one-sidedness, the bias, and in that sense the lack of credibility of these attacks. But nevertheless, they exist. And I agree with you that we must stand up against them. We must explain our position and try to defend ourselves, because these are unfair attacks and they make damage. They do damage to our societies, our political ideals and goals. So it's important to talk about these.
Yes, absolutely. We call this phenomenon ideological dictatorship.
Exactly.
That actually you're allowed to have only one ideological view, only one ideological program, and if you diverge, then you're automatically labeled someone who has abandoned the ideal of democracy, rule of law, and so on. But of course,
by the way, it's exactly the same kind of thinking pattern as under communism. it basically is, I mean, this type of left-wing liberal extremism that you're talking about, I think has its intellectual roots in the communist ideology. That's exactly their tempo, their idea. Only that is acceptable. Everybody else is a fascist, is an extremist, is dangerous, and must be logged out of political discourse. So you have to see the parallels. Very interesting.
Yes, what of course works in the advantage of the Hungarian government is the fact that it has been re-elected several times. It's very difficult to accuse the government of abandoning the ideal of democracy if it gets re-elected several times in a row. So
exactly.
Yeah, also in the Estonian media, I've asked people, that you are accusing them of being undemocratic, then how do you explain this fact that they are re-elected time after another? The main problem with accusations against Hungary, so it seems at least to me, in Estonia, is that they are never factual. They're never fact-based. They're always very vague, very sort of, let's say, they're just on the level of slogans. They have abandoned the ideal of democracy. What do you mean? What are the facts that lead us to this conclusion? And whenever you ask this question, the liberals fail to give you a reasonable answer. That's what I've also noticed. But perhaps we should take a look at the facts. What has factually changed in Hungary in the last months? I mean, apart from the things we all know, in many countries, there were several limitations of movement and so on. But has anything substantially changed in Hungary?
I would not say that substantially things have changed. Quite simply, but quite clearly, the country and the government has adapted to the situation, the crisis situation posed by the coronavirus challenge. And what we did was, together with other countries in Central Europe and Eastern Europe, I think we made clear decisions on time or in time. And as a result of that, I think we have managed to control this outbreak of the virus, and we have avoided the kind of catastrophic situation and catastrophic scenario that we have seen in the north of Italy, that we've seen afterwards in Spain and some other countries where there was an explosion of people. Here, a special state of danger has been introduced. It was introduced by the government for 2 weeks. Following that, the parliament had to decide about that, and the parliament decided to postpone to continue with the state of danger until the end of the pandemic. There was limitations introduced about free movement, as in many other places. Hospitals were brought, and all medical institutions, in fact, were brought under control. And the Hungarian army sent people around there to work together with hospital directors to make sure that they organize the preparations for infected people, and a number of other things. There was an operative body created, composed of health experts. The Sergeant General, like in other countries, they lead the effort, they led the effort.
Yeah.
There was the Ministry of Interior involved there, etc. The government also looked at the economy and the economic slowdown, which was sudden and very serious. And we've introduced a number of aids, of decisions to help small businesses, for example, to help people. We also talked to the banks, and there was a suspension of paying loans back during this crisis situation. So there's an extension of time available, and a number of other decisions with the aim to help people, to have small businesses, to have the Hungarian economy get through this. In fact, we are in the process now of negotiating or working on next year's budget, the budget for 2021. And that budget obviously will reflect also extra measures, extra funds and helping measures to aid people, aid businesses, so that we can get back to normal once the limitations are over. The Parliament will end the special state of danger situation in 2 weeks' time, or less than 2 weeks' time, in the middle of June. So by the end of this month, the second part of June, end of June, also the legal situation will get back to normal, as thankfully, the pandemic and the virus threat is decreasing. So I'm very proud of those steps, and I'm proud also of the Hungarian people's cooperation, because that was necessary to contain this threat of the virus.
Yeah. Well, what you describe sounds very much like the program which was enforced in many other countries, including Estonia.
Yes, exactly.
There's nothing really special or like extraordinary in those steps. Yeah. So this really doesn't strike in any way, I would say. But let me ask you a few more questions in order to basically portray the other side of the story as concerns a vision laid out in an interview published about 1 week ago in the biggest newspaper in Estonia, Postimees. It was an interview conducted with a colleague of yours who is also a member of the European Parliament, Katalin Czech. And in this interview, she portrayed a very dark image of the situation in Hungary. And already in the title of this interview, she basically declared that the virus revealed Orban's shortcomings in medicine, economy, and democracy. So let me ask, as the first question, did the Hungarian medical system cope with the system, or did it collapse somehow? Or was it revealed that it was completely incapable of dealing with the situation as she was indicating?
On the contrary. In fact, the Hungarian medical system, hospitals, clinics, the whole medical profession, in fact, has proven a great strength, in fact, of the defense against the virus, and they were the leading agency and leading sector, obviously, in this. We are very proud of the work of the doctors, of the nurses, of hospitals. We are also very proud of their cooperation in this joint effort. What we had to do, and what every other country that made steps in time did, was that we prepared for the defense. So that meant also the purchase and shipping into Hungary of protective material, masks, oxygen material to have people breathe, breathing machines, etc. On the one hand, but on the other hand, it also meant the organization of hospital beds, the organization of the capacity of hospitals, of clinics, of medical institutions to cope with a larger number of people infected. In that kind of situation, when you don't know what is, how far it's going to go, and that's how it began. Yeah. And we saw how it can get accelerated out of control in other places. What you have to do then is prepare for the worst case scenario. So you have to free beds, you have to make capabilities available for a large influx of infected people if that happens. We were ready, and they were done. These things were done on time. And because of the social distancing decisions, which also, as I said, people observed and respected, we have managed, knock on wood, we have managed to limit the spread of the virus. So we haven't had the kind of explosion that other places saw. And so that is a good sign that the preparation was in time. It was well. It was, it was efficient, and it's ready. If people get sick now or later on. And that's very good. So it was a big test, in fact, of the whole medical establishment. And I think as a result also of this threat, we have now made even more investments into the medical sector. We have invested money in material, in machines, in technology more than before. And that will also serve in general the medical system, the healthcare system, the hospitals of Hungary, and so that's a good additional result of that preparation.
Okay, the next point that she brought forward was that also Hungarian economy has proved to be very weak and basically not fit to handle the situation. I mean, could you perhaps describe in a few words what is the state of the Hungarian economy, and has the economy been growing throughout the last years, or let's say throughout the last 10 years after the crisis of 2008? How has it been, more or less, in comparison with other countries?
Yeah, well, I wonder really what kind of data the deputy that you mentioned, Katalin Czech, what kind of data, what kind of facts she was based herself on when she said such nonsense. I mean, it's on the contrary. Again, the Hungarian economy has been continuously growing under the 10 years of the Orban governments. When we, just very shortly, when we took over the government in 2010, after a disastrous socialist liberal coalition, Hungary had to turn to the IMF for help. We were as bad as Greece was at the time, in the middle of the euro crisis and the economic crisis of 2008-9. So we were hit in the worst way. The Orban government managed to strengthen the economy. We have finalized or finished the IMF deal. We sent them home. We introduced some extra taxes for international business presences in Hungary, so that they contributed to the balancing of the Hungarian budget. The national debt has been decreasing. Job creation has been steady going for 10 years. And in fact, by the time now that the virus came, we basically almost reached no unemployment. We were somewhere around 3%, 3-4%, so it was very near to full employment, in fact. We have lost some jobs, obviously, like
yes, of course.
In other countries. But so far, the numbers, in fact, show that the Hungarian economy will not see as bad influences or results of this crisis situation as others. Mm-hmm. So according to the forecast of the National Bank and the forecast of some other institutes that are looking at economic data, we will either be near a 0% economic growth, or it may even be that we maintain some growth, maybe not as high as 4 or 5% as before, mm-hmm. but growth nevertheless. So knock on wood again, it seems that the Hungarian economy has been strong enough to withstand mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
the effects of this crisis. And as I say, in addition, the government has already introduced a number of measures to help people, to help SMEs, Hungarian companies and others, so that jobs can be retained and the economy can restart. So mm-hmm. I'm much more optimistic, and my optimism is based on numbers and on the facts, not on a political program of hopes mm-hmm. or negative hopes by the opposition.
But if we generalize a lot, we can safely say that the Hungarian economy hasn't done worse in comparison to the economies of neighboring states, let's say.
On the contrary, it has done, I think, better mm-hmm. than the European average, and that's good. And the economy was in good hands and was in a good shape mm-hmm. Before. So that's the major difference between now, how the coronavirus hit, or when it hit, as opposed to 12 years ago or 11 years ago when the 2008 and 9 crisis hit. Mm-hmm. Then it hit a weakened Hungarian economy with high unemployment, indebtedness, etc. Now, every number was good in comparison to that, and in comparison to the European average. In fact, the Hungarian economy has been one of the best performing in the whole EU.
Mm-hmm. Another accusation which is often brought against Hungary recently, actually for years already, as you said earlier, is that there is almost no independent free media remaining in Hungary. I know that it sounds weird, but also the biggest newspaper in Estonia declared in its editorial of 1st April the 1st, which was actually entitled Goodbye Hungary, indicating that Hungary has left the free world. In this editorial they said that there is almost no independent free media remaining in Hungary. And also Mrs. Czech hints at this situation, saying that so-called oligarchs close to Mr. Orban have bought many of the newspapers and now basically sing the song which is suitable to the government. How would you comment about those on those things?
I tell you this: the only difference between media in Hungary and media in the majority of Western European states or other EU member states, not only Western European, is that in Hungary there is more of a balance of ideas reflected in the papers. The only problem, really, of Katalin Czech and her colleagues, the opposition and others, and the international liberal left, their only problem is that in Hungary you can hear, in fact, both sides of the story. You cannot only read and watch their interpretation of things. You can also read and you can also watch and hear on the radio a conservative interpretation or a Christian democratic traditional interpretation of what's going on in Hungary, in the European Union, in the world. They are not used to it. As I said in the beginning, they are now the enemies of freedom. They have no tolerance for views other than their own. And if a country or a community has that kind of freedom, really a wide range of ideas, then they immediately start talking about dictatorship, and they bring in NGOs who proclaim that freedom is over, that there's no democracy, and goodbye and all that. He calls just the fact that there are conservative owners of newspapers or owners of TV channels or radio stations, then they immediately say, well, that's an Orban oligarch. No, it's not an Orban oligarch. It just happens to be an owner of a TV station who doesn't agree with the liberal worldview of these people. He has other views, and he has built up a TV station, a radio or TV channel, radio station, newspapers, portals that reflect other values. I mean, those values. So that's the only thing. I mean, in fact, if you look at the public discourse in Hungary, the debates, they are very lively, and all kinds of points of views are presented, and that's fine. That's fine. But again, the liberal left is not used to, and they don't like it when people with force and with some credibility present their own views against the liberal canon. They don't like that, but they should get used to it. That is freedom.
Yeah, it all sounds very familiar. We live in the same situation. That already having a difference of opinion in the mainstream media is seen as a huge threat to democracy and plurality of opinions.
Yeah. And I tell you another thing here, because we are both members of the European Union, and it's very important that we are there. But similarly to this intolerance of the liberal elite in the media or in the intelligentsia, similarly to the general idea, they are also intolerant about any criticism of the European Union or even more of Brussels and the way things are handled there by the Brussels bureaucracy, by the leaders of the Commission, etc. If you criticize that, as we have been criticizing many things coming from Brussels, then you immediately are labeled anti-European. You are labeled Eurosceptic, you're labeled nationalist and chauvinistic and all of that. Whereas it's very important to have debates about the European Union, how it is led, where it goes, what kind of priorities it says, and how it deals with its many members and the various values and opinions that are reflected there. So just another example, a debate about Europe, they also have this idea of immediately putting you out of the acceptable circle if you have any criticism.
Yeah. Absolutely. I completely agree with you that very often we also see that let's say European Union as it is considered as a synonym of Europe. You don't like European. If you don't like the European Union as it is, you don't like Europe. You don't like the idea of unity of Europe, which is a complete lie, of course, and a demagogic statement.
Exactly.
Let me also ask you about one other thing, which is often brought up when Hungary is attacked, namely the law or the legislation which was passed in order to prevent dissemination of false information. It is portrayed by critics of the Hungarian government as a step taken to suppress freedom of speech. But could you explain in a few words what is this law actually about and how has it been enforced?
Right. Well, first of all, this law was not new. This law already existed. The only thing that was changed during the state of danger is that some sanctions were increased a little bit for certain acts. Let me make it very clear. This has nothing to do with opinion, because this is the accusation that now it's impossible to tell an opinion other than the government, and that's why it's undemocratic. It has nothing to do with a political opinion of any kind. It strictly and specifically talks about the spreading of lies, of things that are knowingly false and have nothing to do with reality, and they are related to the pandemic and to the efforts to protect the community, protect the people against the pandemic. So, for instance, there were some spreading of lies about how hospitals were unable to deal with people requesting treatment, or there were lies spread about how there is no equipment at hand, etc. And at a time of a crisis, of an extraordinary situation like this was, these, if they are spread without any sanction, can cause harm and actually can pose a danger if people get frightened by it and may do things that are out of the normal conduct of things. Mm-hmm. And so, quite simply, that was what it was aimed at. Mm-hmm. Also, in terms of posts on social media, because I know this has also been brought up, the same thing. It was not about opinions; it was about the spreading of false information purposefully, where there was any sanction in the law. Let me tell you an example. The New York Times, which is a nice liberal paper, so it must be credible to everybody on the left, they had an article about how in Germany over the past few months, almost 40 police raids have happened on people because of posts on Facebook and posts on other social media outlets, spreading hate or dangerous unacceptable statements. Well, similarly, there is an increased attention now on spreading of either hate speech or of knowingly false information with the intent to cause trouble. Then there should be a sanction, which is clearly written in the law, and this has been the case during this special state of danger.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But just to be clear, no politician has been prosecuted under this law. No journalist has been prosecuted under this law. Nobody has been prosecuted for a political opinion, let's say.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Very clearly, again, it has nothing to do with expressing a political opinion of any type. It's strictly speaking and only exclusively talks about the spreading of false information knowingly with the intention of causing some trouble or spreading unfounded statements.
Yeah, on a large scale, as I remember the wording of the law.
Yeah.
One thing which I especially like about the Hungarian government and the policies that it enforces is that it cares more about the opinion of the Hungarian people than it does about the opinion of the European bureaucracy. So the question I would like to ask you is also that how has the Hungarian people reacted to the way the Hungarian government handled the crisis? Have there been any opinion polls or what?
There have been several opinion polls, and there are also now towards the end of the special state of danger period. They are all basically telling us that the vast majority of people approve of the decisions of the government. They approve of how the crisis has been handled in general, as well as the specific decisions about order, about helping the economy, about helping the people, about the organization of the medical facilities. So yes, they seem to be satisfied with it. We are, in general, very receptive of what people think about our decisions. The Fidesz government has introduced, for example, what we call national consultations. A national consultation, we are beginning a new one now, just about the coronavirus, how it has been handled, what kind of priorities should the government have. And it already is asking people about the European Union response and what kinds of help should be put forward. So we have been doing these consultations online as well as on a written format, so people receive a letter and they can express their opinion on a number of questions. This has been very important. It's another thing that the opposition has been criticizing. And they have said that, well, this is just propaganda. This is just campaign stuff and all that. And populism, of course, all the time. But the fact of the matter is, what people think and how they receive or how they interpret a government policy and our decisions is very important. If you talk about mass democracy, which we are living in, then I think if you do that, you have to respect what people think. You have to govern in a way that you take into account their opinion. You have to communicate in a way, in a modern way, using all kinds of things, Facebook and mobile phones and all that, but you have to do that with a view to talk to the people and to listen to them. It's not enough to have their opinion once expressed at elections every 4 years. Those are, of course, the most important decision points, but we have always paid attention to stay in touch with the people and to reflect upon what we do and reflect together with the people. That's what we are we're doing, and the polls show that people approve of how we have handled the situation.
As the last question, could you please explain or describe how is the way that the Hungarian government has chosen different from what the European Union would like to see implemented in Hungary and in all other countries? You know, there is clearly a divide between the two ways. You know, there is the liberal way, the leftist liberal way propagated and defended by the European Union bureaucracy, but there is also a different way, the way of independence and democracy. But could you explain in your own words a little bit, you know, what's this way all about in general?
Well, if you look at European policy and the vision about European cooperation, we have, I think, a very clear vision. And I believe that this is a vision that enjoys the majority support also in Hungary and perhaps in other places too. I could say it's a vision of sovereign nation states cooperating on their free will, doing things together, and only delegating decisions to the center, to Brussels and Brussels institutions, those decisions that are better made there. And the other decisions that are better made at local level, national level, they should remain in the sovereignty of the member states. That's a very clear idea. It has a long history. It goes back to Charles de Gaulle when he was talking about l'Europe des nations, Europe of nations. It goes back, I think, to the founding fathers, who were all Christian Democrats, by the way, of the European cooperation. This is in contradiction to the federalist idea. The federalist idea would like to see a United States of Europe. It would like to see a European government per se, a classical government. It would like to see more and more powers taken to Brussels, where member states become sort of provinces in a way of this center. We don't think that's a good idea. We don't think that it can be forced. We don't think that there is a European people. No, there are nations in Europe with a very rich history and a lot of richness in their differences, not only linguistic differences or geographical differences, but also in terms of mentality, in terms of value system, in terms of all kinds of things. And Europe can be strong if we put those together while we respect these differences. So in that sense, the classical idea of a wide range of colors within Europe, a wide range of ideas that can coexist, but which are respective of each other, is, I think, a good idea. That's, I think, the European way. We believe that if we do that, then we strengthen Europe, and if we try to force this federalist centralism, that's not good. And I also think that people have had enough of centralism in Central and Eastern Europe. We don't want Brussels to become the new Moscow. So we need to be cooperating where we think it's good. And that's the idea, that's the vision that we represent in the European Union.
Yeah, wonderful. I really appreciate this kind of attitude, and I would really like to see it more among politicians, both in Estonia and in other countries too. But it is really great to have such an example in the face of the Hungarian government, which really upholds those ideals and is not ashamed to do so. You know, the idea of democracy, true democracy, the ideal of sovereignty, the ideal of Christianity, the ideal of the family, and so on. So I am personally very grateful to the Hungarian government, and I think many other people are too. And we simply try to do what we can to give a voice to the position of the Hungarian government rather than only its critics. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much for the opportunity again. I think it's very important that people who think likewise, think similarly about these things, about nation, about family, about traditional values, should find each other.
Yeah.
You know, the conservatives, the Christian Democrats maybe have less of a readiness to organize themselves internationally. The left is doing it very well. So we need to find each other, talk to each other, and present to our electorate these ideas. So thank you for the opportunity, and my best wishes for the Estonian people.
Thank you. As a final little remark, would you be ready to give an interview to the biggest newspaper in Estonia, Postimees, if they were ready to make such an interview?
Definitely.
Yes, yeah. I will definitely suggest that to the editor-in-chief.
Yes, please do so.
Okay, thank you once again, and all the best to you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.